there's part of your last diary entry in your book where you talk about, the actual handover ceremony and everything that's going through it, and then you talk about. I was really struck by a part where you're sitting across the table, like with Prince Charles, Prime Minister, and then you have, the Chinese Communist Party officials on the other side, and Jiang Zemin, who's the leader of the CCP at the time, and you describe them as clapped out old tyrants. And then you wonder, why do we allow ourselves to be bullied by these people? I mean, I think that's actually a good question for not just,
Well, it's the question for now
yes,
as well.
Yes.
Our foreign secretary in Britain has just set off. He's in Beijing already, and the new government is very keen to say that this isn't an attempt to reset of relations, but underlying it is all the old all the old rubbish about how you shouldn't say things to the Chinese which will question their own political narrative. And unless you go along with their political narrative, you can't do business and trade with them. It's all absolute hooey. But it still exists today. I was looking up the figures this morning. In the last 20 years, China has had with Britain a huge trade surplus. Today, the Chinese exports to Britain are almost twice the size of Britain's exports to China. And the Chinese investment altogether in Britain is worth about 0.3% of the total. And there are, I think, something like 9,000 or 7,000 jobs sustained by this. So the idea that they're crucial to our economy, and that in order to make sure that they do more to help us economically, you have to kowtow to them, is drivel. I refuse to accept that the Chinese Communist Party in world affairs has the mandate of heaven. What's happening in the Ukraine at the moment, where 60% of Russian weapons, or the weapons and technology which sustains the Russians from abroad, comes from China? How can we go on with the knowledge that Reuters published the other day? It obviously came from one of the security services, that the Russians have established in China a factory which manufactures high-level drones. How do we allow ourselves just to look a little concerned about that, but say, well, it's got to be business as usual? What is business in lieu? Of course, we've got to try to find an arrangement for living alongside China. But business as usual? Our main security services, MI5 and MI6, and the Parliamentary Intelligence Committee, have all in the last year described China as a threat to Britain, as a threat to our national security and a threat to the security of our economy. We know that the investments that China is actually making in Britain are an attempt to buy into high-tech companies or into parts of our infrastructure, which could be politicized. We know that one of the arguments against Chinese electric vehicles is that an electric vehicle is like a mobile computer, and you can find out where anybody's going. You can tap into phone calls and so on. So we know all those things about China, which is not a reason why we shouldn't try to do business with them, but it's a reason for doing business with our eyes open and for insisting that we can say what our concerns are We don't have to cover up our concerns for fear of offending the Chinese. It's absolute rubbish. But it comes on, you go through cycles in politics with people, thinking that we have to kowtow to China, and then they become more realistic and they go back to the kowtow mode as well. And I just think it's sad that there are these delusions which still exist in politics, and they're very largely, of course, encouraged by parts of business and some of the consultancies who have large numbers of Chinese clients, and they want to offend them. You know what it's like. And it's a bit dispiriting from time to time, and a bit dispiriting from as well when you try to explain what your concerns are about universities. I mean, I am very keen on Hong Kong Chinese and mainland Chinese and Taiwanese Chinese coming to the university that I was chancellor of until recently. I think it's very good, provided that they have the same liberal educational experience as everybody else has, provided that some of them aren't persuaded by the Chinese embassy, which happens, to become narcs and to tell tales about other students, provided that when you do research collaboration with them, you are certain that it's not in association with the surveillance firms or with firms that are in the military security complex. So, I'm not against trying to deal with China, but I'm against trying to deal with China on the basis of the fact that you can never criticize, the fact that you can never call them out when they break their agreement, as they did over coronavirus, after having signed up to the international health regulations in 2006, which committed them to giving timely, transparent advice when there was a new illness, outbreak of a new illness, assuring the Australians. The then foreign minister is the same guy as his foreign minister today, Wang Yi. He was in Australia, assuring the Australians that yes, there was an outbreak of influenza in Wuhan, but it was manageable and not permissible and not transmissible. At the same time, the Chinese were buying hand over fist PPE equipment in America and Australia and so on. And when the Australians said they wanted a WHO investigation, the Chinese threatened to cut off all exports from Australia. Well, it was a threat because they actually needed the barley for beer and they needed the iron ore because it was cheaper than any other. But they get away with that too often. And I don't think it's helpful for them. And I think it's rather demeaning for us.